You're all on film. So I'm going to give everyone a minute or two to get ready. And while I do that, I will make a couple announcements. Let me just check my setting. Maybe. Let's see, microphone. Looks like you can see me. And I was hoping it would stay sunny. It might stay sunny. And I made a really important announcement. Can't find my mouse. And so I did make a couple announcements on the, this thing's driving me nuts. On the teams, I posted a couple really important things. The first thing, all of you should have gotten some kind of, or I guess it's 2 days, so probably by noon today, you should be getting some kind of thing for, oh God, there's so much. Your AP ID number should come in today at some time, your exam ticket, and that will give you your AP ID number. It should arrive 2 days before your exam by email. And in fact, let me put this on the screen so everybody can see it. Sorry, I got to move all kinds of stuff around, and I have a sticky note in the way, because that's the way things happen here. And so hopefully you can see this, but you should get this by 2 days before, or you can access it by going to myap.collegeboard.org, and you need this ID. As I just found out yesterday afternoon, you really need this ID. And so please check this out as soon as you can, and make sure you get that ID. Don't share your so-called e-ticket with anybody, but you will need that on Friday to take the test. And you need that, and you also need your initials. And this gets to the next thing that you will need. And I posted this on, so let me move this back. Sorry, I can't find my mouse again. Ugh. You're gonna watch me struggle with moving the mouse around. That's fun. Okay, I got a question. Yeah.
So I was under the impression that it's supposed to be different for our tests. Like it said that this code is unique to you in this test, but so far for my 3, I've gotten the same code.
Good.
I mean, it makes it easy to remember. I just don't know if that's what's supposed to happen.
You know, if you get the same one, if you got it from the College Board, if you got the email, it should be fine. Okay. I think the big thing is they want it unique for you as an individual. Unique for you as an individual. And just one sec. I had to accept a couple other people. All right. Yeah, so as far as I know, it should be unique, or should be unique for you as an individual. Use whatever they give you. But here's the other thing, and you might have heard this from other teachers, but I just found out like literally today, because I just never even thought about it. This is so new, and it is so much different than other tests, but I posted this on here. So hopefully you'll see this. God, this is annoying. Okay, I posted this on each of you. You must, so if you have Whatever you submit to the AP, you have to have your AP ID number, which I'm assuming that is your exit number, and your initials. And so you must include that on the top of each page you submit. So write it on top or type it on top of the page. You need to have that. As I understand it, this happened on the AP government class, and some students didn't do that, and they're telling them they have to retake the test or do the late exam. And that seems absolutely ridiculous to me. I don't know why they do that. I don't know why they did not make that clear. Maybe they did it on the directions on when you get the test, but make sure you have that, your AP ID number and your initials. And that seems totally unfair and arbitrary to me, but as long as we know it now, let's go ahead and make sure that we do that. And also getting back to this, make sure you go through the test schedule. Make sure you have, I told you to download make sure that you download the checklist for the day, do it before the test. Download that checklist so you don't have to think about it before the test. If you go back and look at the posts I gave you all these posts again. I have a significant amount of information on there. I have practice information. I posted all of this stuff in every class. And so make sure that you check on that. Let me look one more thing. Here's what the exam day checklist looks like, and make sure you get it. Maybe if you haven't printed it, print it now. I'm really worried about all this stuff happening very quickly, and a bunch of buttons to push, and everything takes longer, especially with your internet connection, and all those things add to your stress. So get that done now. Also, make sure that if you're taking pictures of it, make sure that you are clear on what you're going to do for pictures. On the iPhone, the notes feature, you can take pictures and turn that to take pictures on notes on an iPhone or an iPad, and then convert that to a PDF. And that's a pretty good program. That's probably the easiest one to use. But make sure that you have looked at it before you take it so you know how you're going to do it. At 12:45 or whatever test it might be. Has anyone taken a test yet?
I have. It worked really slick. I just scanned everything into a PDF and submitted it.
And did 45 minutes go by pretty fast? Was it 45 minutes for that test too?
Yeah, it went by really fast.
It's gonna fly. So when you get the question, you need it, make sure that the first thing you do after you read your question, check your review packet. Go through your review packet to that area so you have it all set up so you're already thinking about that area. Then quick look at the documents as quick as you can do, whatever shorthand you have, quick outline, and then start writing. And don't forget, the last paragraph of an essay is the least important. When that opening paragraph, get at least 2 examples of context. So those are 2 things from your review guide that you don't have on or you're not going to use in your body paragraphs. Make sure that you use some kind of outside information that you relate to each document, and don't waste time. God, 45 minutes is so fast. And if you get in a situation where you think, oh, I'll look it up online, you're sunk. You're sunk. You won't have time. Yeah, I see another person says it took a long time. Yeah, it's gonna fly by really fast. But at the same time, if you have that review packet made, you have some good idea about what each of those are about that era. You're gonna feel better about it. You better write it. Any other questions on that? Oh, let me get one more thing then really quick. I also gave you a few more samples. If you look on the post, and this should be on every class, I gave you a sample, a few things on how to use the documents on Road to Revolution, sample on from the last DBQ we took on the atomic bomb, a practice DBQ just for something you to look at on Gilded Age industrialization, and practice DBQ on the progressives. A few people have submitted parts of DBQs or DBQs on just some of the practice just for me to look at. And I have taken a look at it. I just haven't had time to type anything, but I will when as soon as I'm done with this. So please check what's posted there. Yeah, time is going to fly, and that I'm a little bit worried about, but also at the same time, you hopefully are prepared and ready to write. Any other questions? Okay, so what I thought I would do is I'll review anything from the review sheets, and not only the main review sheet I gave you, but also that supplemental where I shortened down the last period. I will answer any questions on that. I'm going to go for about 20 minutes, and then I will, or about 20, 25 minutes on that. I'll give you a sample or two just to kind of think about DB or thesis statements and that sort of thing. And then I will finish up with any other questions you have. And then after this at noon, I will go over, or I will take anybody who has their main review packet done, I will give you credit for it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through everyone who's handed in and note down that you got it in first, and then I'm going to go back and grade it. I just haven't had time to grade them all, but I will give you extra credit on this. And like I said, I'm giving you a lot of points. You might have noticed it's 400 points. It's a lot of points. I reward you immensely for this. So I don't have the in front of me. I kept trying to do it and scroll through. That didn't work. And so the Wagner Act, which should be on that both the Wagner Act and the Jungle, 2 quick questions. And both of those are on that kind of supplemental one. Or yeah, they're both on there. And so let me do the Wagner Act. The Wagner Act was law passed as part of the Second New Deal to allow for unions to collectively bargain. And so this was this was a law to make it illegal for companies to try to dissuade unions. And it set up the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, to so for workers to grieve any ways to stop unions. But like any regulatory body, just like the ICC all the way on, if the president appoints people who are anti-union, it will be anti-union or vice versa. But the Wagner Act was part of Keynesian economics. Labor unions raise wages for all workers, including workers who are outside of labor unions. And by raising wages, this puts more purchasing power into people's hands, and it raises demand. And remember, demand is the key facet of Keynesian economics. Just as conservative economics, the key facet is to put money into the hands of the wealthy. Keynesian economics, to put money in the hands of working people, which is the vast majority of people. And this is going to trigger a wave of labor unions, a growth of unions, personified by the Congress of Industrial Organizations, which was John L. Lewis's industrial union of all labor union, of all workers. And they would fight with the AFL for a long time, which was skilled labor unions. But the CIO would get big victories when the United Auto Workers did a sit-down strike and got GM, and by getting United Steel. But eventually, almost 40% of all workers would be in a labor union. And this would dramatically increase wages and benefits. We are the exact opposite now. Okay, the Jungle and the FDA. The Jungle is, and that's on the same page. By the way, you get to see me kind of strolling around. I did sit for a while, and I hated it. So I now set up where I can stand up and walk around my part of my living room. So back to this. Where are we at here? The Jungle. So The Jungle was written by Alton Sinclair, and it was a novel that was, Sinclair was a socialist, and he was hoping to show how awful it was for working people to bring socialism, better working conditions, better working conditions for workers. But middle class readers read The Jungle and saw basically, we're eating the slop that it said in The Jungle. We're eating this, and this would trigger a movement that was already happening, but something to pro-regulation and feel the progressive desire to give some kind of minimum standards for producers. And that includes food production. And out of that would become the Food and Drug Administration, but also the Meat Inspection Act, which would be create regulatory bodies to regulate food, meat, and drugs. And a lot of companies eventually began to accept it because they all would have to meet these standards, but also they're worried about losing the European market. But Sinclair would be considered a muckraker, even though he technically wasn't one. Okay, where are we at here? Henry Clay and the American System. Okay, I don't have that packet right in front of me. I think that's on page 4, but we're talking about 1820s, actually the teens of the 1800s, all the way through to Henry Clay died in 1850. But Henry Clay and the American System. First off, Clay would be known as Mr. Whig. He'd run for president 3 times and personify the elite idea of the Whig system, but very nationalist. Big government to support the wealthy, to have industrialization, and also to protect the big plantations. So Clay personified this Whig ideal. And so to promote the Whig, using government aid to promote the elite. And his program that would be personify the Whig Party would be called the American System. And the American System had 3 components: high protective tariff, a Bank of the United States for the strong financial system, and what they called then internal improvements, using taxpayer money to build roads, canals, and railroads. And he would have success back and forth on this. The Democrats generally opposed because they saw this as only helping the elite. Internal improvements we would call infrastructure today. Congressional Reconstruction and military Reconstruction. Good, I'm glad someone mentioned that. And so that's going to be after the Civil War. We're talking 1867. I think that's the end of period 4 in your book. I don't like the periods that the AP divides it up in, but I guess it's a shorthand. It will work. But Congressional Reconstruction is the meat of Reconstruction. And that's after presidential Reconstruction under President Johnson basically allowed Confederates and white rule back in the South. And Congressional Reconstruction would basically be the idea of bringing equal political and legal and economic rights to African Americans, so equal rights. And the meat of it would be the Military Reconstruction Act of 1867, which the military would occupy 5 zones of the former Confederacy. They would occupy them to assure that the law was being followed. And all of these, every former Confederate state must do these things to get out of military rule. They must ratify the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery. They must ratify the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed civil rights and citizenship to former slaves, and the 15th Amendment, which said that the vote could not be taken away based upon race. And so these 13th, 14th, and 15th. And so in essence, guaranteeing civil rights, because Congress then would pass civil rights laws to enforce those amendments. And that would be the meat of it. But to the Confederacy, they would see that as an invasion. And the Military Reconstruction Act would bring rights to former slaves and would bring a flowering, at least for a short time, of political rights for former slaves. And a lot of these so-called Reconstruction governments were created, which actually had in as members former slaves and the flowering of a Republican Party at that time. Remember, the Republican Party at the time was not quite the pro-business party down the road. Blue or black pen, I would highly recommend using blue or black pen. I think when you take a picture, it'll show up better. And so it doesn't necessarily say that, but I think you'd be crazy not to use blue or black pen. Use blue or black pen.
What were the three parts of the Sherman, or sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing, the American system?
American system, high protective tariffs, Bank of the United States, and internal improvements, roads, bridges, roads, railroads, and canals from taxpayer money.
Thanks.
And you can imagine the Democrats are saying, somewhat correctly, you're going to tax poor people to give it to the wealthy. Okay, next one, the Sherman Antitrust Act. And so that should be near the end of section, period 6. Yeah. But this is 1890, and the Sherman Antitrust Act would be passed due to the growing popular anger over the power of monopolies. So people are having enough monopolies, and to do something about monopolies. And remember, trust became synonymous with monopolies, especially with the wave of consolidations that were happening at that time. And so the Sherman Antitrust Act basically said that the government can break up monopolies. Anybody that the actual technical words they used was called no illegal restraint of trade. Restraint of trade means basically doing what monopolies do. All you have to do is watch Amazon now, and that's what monopolies do. And it said it's illegal to do this. But the Sherman Antitrust Act was written in such a way, on purpose, that it was almost impossible to enforce, and it was impossible to define what a monopoly was. Holding companies, which is a corporation to own other corporations, which is the meat of monopolies. That's where monopolies come from. For example, Alphabet is the holding company of the monopoly, which is Google. But they didn't ban holding companies. And so the Sherman Antitrust Act acted like it was going to break up monopolies, but didn't do it. And this would help lead to the Populist Party. I should add that the Sherman Antitrust Act was strengthened a little bit with the Clayton Antitrust Act during the Wilson administration, but technically the Sherman Antitrust Act is still the law of the land today. And because it is so hard to enforce, mail just arrived. It's so hard to enforce that, and it's either really hard to break up monopolies, or if it's like today, very conservative economically, which has no problems with monopolies, we have, wow. In fact, Uber, which is actually failing, is going to buy Grubhub. And that's like the definition of monopoly. It's pretty amazing how that happened. Okay, let's get to Barbarossa. Barbarossa. Barbarossa is the German invasion of the Soviet Union. And they invaded to get oil, they invaded to get resources, and also ideological, intense anti-communism, and also a huge population of Jews lived in the Soviet Union. And this is the ideological fight that was World War II. The fascist Nazis, their mortal enemy were the communists, and vice versa. The communists were the Soviet Union. And so this was the invasion of the Soviet Union. So it's in many ways like the second part of World War II. The first part was the Battle of France, which shockingly Germany won really fast. But this is so important because once Germany invaded the Soviet Union, once this happened, and Germany could not knock them out in 6 months, this would knock out, or this would be, the Soviets would be the force that would defeat Nazi Germany. They would be the force. I thought it was in the shortened version. Well, I told you anyways. It'd be the Soviet Union would defeat the Soviet Union. I really thought it was. But the US would give them money through Lend-Lease, and you see the stepping stones of the Cold War. Okay, let's get to the next question. You're going to turn in both, but to get the extra credit, I want the main review packet. The main review packet, I'll give you the extra credit for. But I'm giving you credit for both. The main review packet's 400 points. And the other one, I just arbitrarily gave it 50. So I'm gonna reward you pretty immensely for that. So let's get to the next one, double V and segregation. Just real fast, I thought I said this the other day, but I'm going to say it again. It doesn't hurt to hear it again. Double V was H. Philip Randolph's plan he was the head of the Porters Union for equal rights for African Americans in coordination with the NAACP. And what it meant, double V, was a double victory for the fight for civil or equal rights, as in ending Jim Crow laws, so integration, economically and political integration, the right to vote, etc., and also fighting in the war. If desegregators or integrated units of black and white soldiers, so black soldiers fighting in combat for citizenship, they at the front cannot come home and be denied the rights of citizenship at home. The same thing that Frederick Douglass fought for in the Civil War. So that's double V and segregation. And while this is going on, you have the Great Migration. There'll be these unbelievable race riots. No, you do not need the long version of period 7. I want you to stop at 1896. I want you to stop at 1896. So, abolitionists, Douglass, and Underground Railroad. Boy, did I pack a lot in there. Just one second. My door was still open. Okay, so abolitionist, that is on page 42 of your review guide, and I think it's near the left corner. Okay, I'm not looking at it. I'm guessing it has to be in period 4, but probably on page 3. I got to be close, right? I got to be close. And let's talk about abolitionists. And this a lot of times is lumped under antebellum reform, even though it's much more complex than that. And abolitionists were morally opposed to slavery. Morally opposed. Thought slavery was a moral abomination. Now, I should add that abolitionists are different than free soil. Free soil do not want the spread of slavery in the territories, but they aren't necessarily abolitionists. Like Lincoln was free soil, but he was not, at least openly, an abolitionist, even though he hated slavery. So abolitionists want to fight for the complete end of slavery everywhere, not just the territories. And it got its big start in 1831 with the William Lloyd Garrison's newspaper, The Liberator. Abolitionists. But the most famous abolitionist was a former slave who bought his own freedom with his autobiography, Frederick Douglass. And Douglass would be a tireless fighter to end slavery and to demand to get black soldiers to fight for citizenship and then equal rights after the Civil War. Frederick Douglass, who wrote the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. And he would be the most famous of the abolitionists. But he was not like most of the abolitionists. He believed in equal rights. So did Garrison. But most abolitionists didn't necessarily believe in equality. They still saw it as their slavery is immoral, blacks should be free, but they are not quite equal. They are not quite equal. And with that, give me one sec. Let me finish this out. I got to leave for just one second, just be a second. Hey, relax, enjoy yourself, think about other things. But back to this. But a lot of abolitionists, they were part of the American Colonization Society to free slaves and then send them to Africa, thinking that they have to be separate from whites, and they thought of a white republic. The Underground Railroad would be the generic name given to the whole system of safe houses and secret ways and paths and guides who helped slaves run away to the north. And that's part of the reason why Frederick Douglass would call his newspaper the North Star, because the North Star would be a way to guide somebody running away from the South to the North, obviously. And Harriet Tubman would be the most famous of the conductors on the Underground Railroad and Civil War hero. Pretty amazing person. But that's about abolitionists. But one thing we should remember about abolitionists. After John Brown, the most famous of the abolitionists, the Southerners believed that all Northerners were abolitionists, especially all Northern Republicans were abolitionists. And all abolitionists were John Brown, and abolitionists by definition to Southerners equal they want to bring slave rebellion. That is why they called Republicans black Republicans. That's why they went so nuts about John Brown. It wasn't just getting rid of slavery, it was the threat of slave rebellion. Give me 10 seconds.
So how's everybody's day going?
I'm back. You can answer if anybody wants.
Good.
Because everyone's too excited. All right, let's get to Gibbons versus Ogden. Gibbons versus Ogden is this. Where are we at here? Okay. So, Gibbons versus Ogden, the whole argument about that one was, we're not going into details of the case, but what it was is that it said that the Congress did have the absolute right to regulate interstate commerce. Now, it says that in the Constitution, but New York had a monopoly up for trade over the Hudson. And they said, no, you can't regulate trade over the Hudson because that's going to another state. And so interstate commerce. And this was part of the nationalist movement to in the Supreme Court to give more power to the federal government. Now, this was the Marshall Court. So that is the remnants of the old Federalist Party, even though the Federalist Party had died. So Gibbons versus Ogden is a really important decision. So you see that come down the road, like, for example, when the Granger laws were overturned by the Wabash Railroad case, saying that states can't regulate railroads because of interstate commerce. And you see that all the way to this day. In fact, that's an argument to this day right now. There's an argument about personal protection equipment and masks in the federal government, and it's all interstate commerce that goes to Gibbons versus Ogden. It's amazing how these things come around. Okay, Pullman Strike. By the way, is it still recording? Yes. I forgot, Dartmouth versus Woodward. So Dartmouth versus Woodward was another example of the, where are we at here? Another example of the Marshall Court, another example of giving more power to the federal government. And the big thing about Dartmouth versus Woodward, it says that, or it protects the sanctity of contracts. It says contracts are legal documents and therefore protected by law, therefore protected by the federal government. And so it says that contracts will be protected. Dartmouth tried to get out of a contract, basically, is the big issue about that. And it says this in the Constitution, but it's still not clear exactly what that means. This is so important because, first off, by protecting contracts, all business, everything from a loan to a bill of sale, everything's a contract. And so if you take out contracts, or if government protects contracts, that will give some stability for business. But more importantly, by protecting contracts, it protects bigger companies. Those with more power are protected by Dartmouth versus Woodward. Therefore, government is firmly on the side of the most powerful, the tiny percentage on top. Why? Because when contracts are written, contracts always by definition, if it's written by a contract between two entities, two people, two companies, two whatever, that contract will always be written to benefit the powerful. By definition. And if government protects contracts, therefore government protects the powerful. If you want to know what I mean, go take out a loan from a bank, or look, if you want to get a credit card, look at that legal document you must sign to get it. That's a contract, and it's written by them. Wow. Next, moving on, Pullman Strike. And that should be on page 71 of the review book, probably in the back, right diagonal. Actually, that one should be at the end of period 6. That sound right? So, the Pullman Strike, 1894, and one of the biggest strikes in American history, right in the heart of the Panic of 1893. And it started as the Pullman Railway Carriage Company. The Pullman Railway Carriage Company had a strike, and the strike was because during the panic, the Pullman Company used that as an excuse to cut wages and raise prices in the company's store. So they went on strike because their wages were dramatically cut. And the American Railway Union under Eugene Debs, which a guy would run for president. We've talked about Debs a lot. Debs American Railway Union, the ARU, agreed to honor their strike. It's called not crossing the picket line. And they would not work on any train that had a Pullman car, which meant that railway traffic stopped all over the United States. And this became a nationwide strike. And the governor of Illinois and other places were reluctant to do what companies expected, to send out the brand new National Guard and shoot the strikers and make them go back to work for lower wages, kind of like slaves. And it's got to get to the whole wage slave argument, doesn't it? But President Cleveland, Uncle Grover, who was incredibly anti-union and really social Darwinistic, by then everybody's social Darwinistic, must not help workers at all, same year as Coxey's Army, he and his former railway executive, Attorney General Richard Olney, they came up with a plan to put mail cars on all trains when this, which is a constitutional duty to deliver the mail. When the strikers wouldn't work on those trains, that gave the Cleveland administration an excuse to put a court order, an injunction, to force now the strikers to go back to work. Then they could use force because they're enforcing a court order, and it broke up the Pullman strike at great violence. And Debs would be arrested and become a socialist after that. But the big thing about this is that this, first off, showed that those who have the capital will do anything to keep the money, anything. And I don't care who it hurts and who gets starved, who starves. But the other thing is, it showed that the country's sitting on the edge of revolution. What if the next strike is bigger and it overturns everything? This will lead to the populists and then the progressives. Next, the impeachment of Johnson. So that's in 1868. And the first president to be impeached, we've only had 3 now. When this school year started, we only had 2, but now we have 3 presidents impeached. But President Johnson was impeached because he was politically opposed to presidential Reconstruction. He was opposed to Congressional Reconstruction and the Military Reconstruction Act of 1867. He was doing everything possible to hamper the enactment of laws. And they also said he is a blatant racist who's trying to take away rights from people who fought for their rights. But he violated the Tenure of Office Act, which said that presidents could not fire cabinet members or generals, which has dubious constitutionality, but they would use that as an excuse. In fact, they impeached him and then went back and wrote up charges. But the reason they impeached him is because he was hampering, by definition, hampering enactment of laws, which is the constitutional duty of the president. And he was impeached in the House, but in the trial in the Senate, it needs 2/3 of the vote and missed by 1. And so Johnson's administration survived. And they would try to say it was a frivolous impeachment and he didn't deserve to be impeached and it's only political. But yeah, impeachment is political. Johnson was horrible. The other two presidents to be impeached were Clinton and President Trump. And all three of them were acquitted in the Senate, and all three were acquitted in the Senate because of votes of their party. And so they kind of threw it. They said impeachment is awful because it's political, and then they turned around and acquitted him for political reasons, meaning that there's hypocrisy everywhere. Next, okay, I don't like Johnson, so yeah, he should have been impeached. Redeemer government's lost cause. That should be right near the impeachment of Johnson. And the Redeemer governments, those were the governments created after they were created at the end of Reconstruction and after Reconstruction. And that was the reestablishment of white rule, And because Lincoln was a Democrat, Lincoln was a Republican, and the Democratic Party was more solid in the South anyways, they're all Democratic governments. There would be no Republican Party in the South from 1900 until the 1950s, for the most part. And these Redeemer governments would be the governments that they accepted all the tenets of military reconstruction to get the military out, and then they found loopholes. So they would be the ones to establish Jim Crow laws, which would segregate the South. And the biggest part of the Jim Crow laws was not just segregation, but it would bound sharecroppers to the land, becoming virtual slaves. And they would also use things like the grandfather's clause and intimidation to keep blacks from voting. And so by 1900, blacks lost almost all the rights they fought so hard for in the South. And the lost cause would be the growing myth that Southerners were not fighting, the Confederacy was not fighting to defend slavery. The Confederacy was fighting for rights, for states' rights, and it was a noble fight for freedom. And the Civil War was actually the war between the states. And this was an invasion by the North. That's where you get the War of Northern Aggression. And that's where you get the Reconstruction myth, that Reconstruction was an invasion by the North. And you see this sometimes called as the Gone with the Wind theory, that it said that slaves actually liked slavery, that whole positive good theory, and white rule was natural, but the North and their arrogance invaded to destroy the South. And that's where you get all the building of Confederate monuments and all that, the return to the Confederate flag. Okay, I'm going to stop right there for just a few minutes, and then I will go back. I promise. I guarantee it. But let's look. Let's look at a sample. Let's do a sample DBQ really quickly. So let me get it up on the screen. And what you should see are bears. Yes, bears. I know, bears. By the way, that's Yellowstone National Park, and the bears used to arrive to the car. Somewhere, well, I used to have a picture, but it's lost. Actually, there's no photographic evidence of my childhood, but there used to be one of a bears licking the window of our car when I was 4 years old in Yellowstone National Park. They just come right to the car. So yeah, I can't believe it either. But bears can only mean one thing.
A practice thesis?
Yes. No way. Here's a practice thesis. Everyone, quick, jot one down somewhere in the back of your forehead. If you have a crayon, write it on your wall, whatever it might be. The point of the question, position, only A and B. All right, how did we do? I wish I could say you would get this question, but nah, you never know. I still have a feeling it's going to be something either about industrialization before the Civil War in that era, or industrialization after the Civil War in that era. I just have a feeling. But take my feeling and you can take it with a grain of salt, because that means nothing. You still have to be prepared. But let's look at the one I wrote. Maybe. Oh, it's a different font. How did I do that? And so if you look at that one, I basically agree with the statement. So I made it very clear. And then the tied it together is the ideological disagreements about slavery. And the big thing about the ideological disagreements over slavery, both my body paragraphs somehow will address or relate to that. So that ties the two body paragraphs together. My position is like a common denominator. It ties the two together. And then body paragraph 1, the slavery in the territories. And that goes everything from the Compromise of 1850 all the way through Kansas, Nebraska, bleeding Kansas, etc. And then the election of Lincoln. And if anybody wants me to take a look at theirs, I've already looked at a bunch of people's. You want to take a look at one? Well, I'll give you another example tomorrow, but I might give one more today. But let's get back then to the exciting review. Are there any questions on that?
Can I read mine?
Sure.
Okay. The ultimate cause of the Civil War was conflicting ideologies between the North and South. The South believed in Calhoun's positive good theory, while the North favored abolition and/or free soil.
Yeah, that should work very well. Yeah, because you have, it doesn't necessarily say secession in the question. So you can talk about the two different agreements, and then a really good thing for the context would be then the election of 1860 and that kind of thing. Because yeah, that'll work out great. Anybody else want to read theirs or type theirs in? Does anybody just want me to keep reviewing a few more things? My guess is you're stunned. Okay, let's review. So, socialism. Come on, move. Just a sec. All right, is that off the screen then? Good. Okay, so socialism. Where are we at here? Socialism? All right. That should be somewhere bottom of period 6, so near the bottom of page 5 or top of page 6, somewhere in there. But socialism, as we need it in this context, is another reaction to the Industrial Revolution. And it's a reaction to the fact that the Industrial Revolution, those who have the capital and the finance from the capital had they were getting all or significant amount of the wealth and all the profit. And so socialism believed that the way to solve or get all the wealth and profit, creating massive inequalities of power, political power, legal power, economic power between the haves and the have-not. And socialists believe that we must have, as a people, we need as much as possible a classless society. Not everyone equal, just no big gap between the classes. And so a classless society, and the way to do that would be the workers must control the means of production. Workers control the means of production. Because if they control the means of production, the value of that production will not be stolen from them through low wages and profits going to the top. And so that is the main element of socialism. So the workers must control the capital. And you can imagine how that is a direct threat to capitalists, a direct threat, because they've taken the risk and they got the profit. And so the main things that the socialists want are things like powerful labor unions, workers' rights. They want workers' rights like safer working conditions and workers' control on how hard they work and what they do on the job. So better working conditions overall. You could come up with a lot of things for that. But they also believe in, a socialist believes in as much democracy as possible. And so individual or regular people have more control over the government and their workplace than ever before. And so socialists are the one who believe in equal rights between the races and equal rights between the sexes. And so that's why people who fought for civil rights are going to be called communists, and people who fought for women's rights are going to be called communists, because they believe in equal rights and political rights, we can, etc. And they're also going to be very anti-imperialism. Imperialism is getting empires, they saw that's profits for those on top. But socialists are all over the place. More moderate socialists like Eugene Debs believed in stronger labor unions and more worker power, but they could do it through the ballot box. So there's all kinds of moderate socialists. Elect people, socialism that way, and more socialist reforms. And then you get more radical socialists who believe that the capitalists will never give up and we might need a violent revolution. The best example of those are the communists or the Bolsheviks. And then the most radical, who believe we're going to have to blow up the whole system, are the anarchists. And they dislike each other completely. But that's why labor unions, which want better working conditions, when they're going to be branded as, to try to discredit them, they won't call them just socialists. At first, they'll call them bomb-throwing anarchists and then Bolsheviks. All right, Mobilization War Production, the OPA. And that should be on the period 7 stuff, 1890 to 1945. And mobilization. Mobilization, that is, in this context, the United States calling out the reserves and gearing up the entire economy for war. That is mobilization, and that's part of total war, where they gear up the entire country. And so that includes things like banning dissent and Japanese internment, but calling out the reserves and organizing the entire economy for war. And the War Productions Board would be created during World War II as a way to organize production. It did not, it worked significantly better than World War I, but not perfect. But this would organize production to tell what companies will produce what. And so the War Productions Board. And then the Office of Price Administration, the OPA, that would be responsible for curbing one of the big problems during war, inflation. And so the OPA would do the one like price controls and rationing. The OPA, the Office of Price Administration. And they would have some success keeping prices low. After the war, there would be post-war inflation, but nothing like after World War II. So they kept price controls and also put on rationing. Rationing of fuel, of gas, of rubber, of meat, of all products that might go up in price. And so that was the World War II method, and it worked pretty well. By the way, this is why when people say we must tackle the coronavirus and COVID-19 like a war, no, it's nothing like a war. The problem with war is there's a shortage of goods and those kind of things because everyone is working, producing goods. Here, we have a significant number of people aren't working, the economy shut down. It's not like a war. People say that either don't know what they're talking about or they're up to something and watch your wallet. So next one, Selective Service, Creel Commission, Social Unity. Yeah, that's a lot for one. That's World War I. And so this was part of what happened when the United States entered the war. And all of these are examples of how the US would adopt total war. Nobody volunteered to fight in the war, with the assumption was 2 million would volunteer, only a couple 100,000 did. So the United States had to do selective service, the draft, and initiate it very quickly. And even though there wasn't huge opposition, to avoid the opposition to the war or opposition to the draft, the United States would adopt or would use the Creel Commission That would be the arm of public information or propaganda. And they would have all kinds of posters and guys who give short speeches called 4-Minute Men, or people like that who will go around to gear up the country to make the sacrifice to war, to make sure that people didn't protest the draft. And what they did in all propaganda is try to say that, we must have the draft or Germany will conquer us. So they brought up fear, saying if you oppose the draft, you're helping the Germans. And in that way, they would enforce social unity. The idea being is we must all be together in the war effort, including not fighting the draft. And if you're opposed, you're not just opposing a political action like the draft or the war, you're actually helping the enemy and therefore a traitor. And so that would be the enforced social unity altogether. And that would lead to things like the Espionage Act and the imprisonment of anybody who opposed the war and Schenck versus the United States. The Neutrality Acts and Lend-Lease, that was right before World War II. And the United States was hoping to avoid the problems of World War I, that US banks loaned money through bonds to Great Britain. And many people believed, somewhat correctly, that a big reason the US entered World War I was to get the British to win, so the banks got their money back. So it was a way to get the banks super rich. Well, not so much the banks, the corporations and the stockholders. And so the Neutrality Acts said that the United States would not only would they be neutral in the war, at first they won't trade with any belligerents. And then eventually they would say cash and carry. We'll trade, but you must give hard cash. And in 1940, this was passed in 39. So 39 and 40, hard cash meant gold. Or we won't trade with you. But by 1941, when Britain was alone and they were broke, President Roosevelt, who realized that Germany was a threat to civilization, they would, Roosevelt would finally get past Lend-Lease, where the United States would loan countries fighting aggression money or supplies to finish fighting aggression, meaning fighting fascism. And so it's a way the United States would give billions of dollars to aid to Britain and the Soviet Union and everybody else fighting Germany and Japan. And it was a good deal. We didn't give enough. I saw a question pop up. I did record the other classes, and yes, they should be on my website. They should be on, not only on this, but they should be on the AP. The AP playlist on YouTube. So the one I have for that, I put everything on there. Last Thursday should be on there. As far as I know it is. Last time I checked it was. So are there any more questions? Oh, there's another question. The TVA, Glass-Steagall, FDIC. Those are three of the big reforms of the first New Deal. And the first New Deal in 1933, these were more anything else just to try to give some kind of recovery. Some kind of relief and recovery. They weren't quite big enough, but a lot of them were also, I mentioned those 3 R's before to you: relief, recovery, and reform. And these were mainly reforms, but the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act. Oh, I'm glad you could come. I hope it helps a lot. I will be on tomorrow. I'm gonna do kind of a brief thing and a few other issues, but if you have any more questions, I will be able to answer tomorrow. I'm gonna do it about 9:20 tomorrow. Back to this, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and that would be to try to stabilize farm prices by paying farmers not to grow crops, and it would be found unconstitutional in 1936 and replaced by the second AAA, but as a way to help small farmers, which we don't do anymore. The TVA was the Tennessee Valley Authority, and that would build dams and also flood control across the Tennessee the Tennessee River system. And this would also bring electricity to rural America. And in many ways would be Roosevelt's proudest accomplishment by bringing electricity to rural areas that did not have it, and show that government was necessary to not only provide jobs and provide flood control, but rural areas would never have had electricity without the government. Glass-Steagall was relatively moderate. They were both conservatives, but this would be the most important reform of the banking industry. It's also technically the Banking Act, but the Glass-Steagall Act would reform the banking industry to regulate the banks, so they would to try to alleviate the problems of risky loans that fueled bubbles. They separated commercial banks, which dealt with regular people and small businesses, and investment banks, which involved in Wall Street and speculation. They said they must be separate. So Glass-Steagall would regulate the banking industry by making the banking industry would become very boring, but profitable. And there would be no financial panics all the way until they ended Glass-Steagall in a conservative revival in 2000. And then the FDIC was part of Glass-Steagall, and that's the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. But if you write the FDIC, you're fine if the question comes to that in the test. And this would set up insurance for deposits. So banks would pay for like insurance. So if the bank goes under, deposits, people's deposits would be somewhat insured. And this is still here. And this helped alleviate the problem of bank panics. So that's part of the first New Deal. Any other questions? Let's do grant and attrition. I can do that. So grant and attrition is something just popped up on my screen. Okay, so grant and attrition. That would be the ultimate strategy that the North would use in the Civil War. Grant would he would symbolize this when he became the overall commander of all Union forces in 1864. And attrition meant killing or slaughtering, destroying so many of the enemy, kill so many of the soldiers they could no longer fight. So make them bleed to death. And so the thought was they couldn't win a battle on the battlefield. They couldn't just win a big victory and end the war, but they will grind the enemy down with a series of battles. And this would be personified with battles like the Wilderness and Spotsylvania and Petersburg. Grind them down. And attrition would become part of total war. Total war is like attrition on the grand scale. So kill so many of the enemy, make them suffer so much that they have to quit. Good, I'm glad somebody mentioned trickle down or supply side economics. That is conservative economics. It is the economic policy of the United States today for the entire Republican Party and a significant amount of the Republican or the Democratic Party. Even though more Democrats are becoming liberal today, we've been conservative since the 1980s. And so the economy of the today is the result of conservative economics. You could say that's good or bad, but that's conservative economics. And trickle-down economics. And what that meant is that government the duty of government is to use the power of government to funnel money to the very wealthy. To funnel money to the very wealthy through things like getting rid of regulations. So food and safety regulations, environmental regulations, the biggie, getting rid of regulations on monopolies, getting rid of antitrust regulations, but also massive tax cuts for the very wealthy, also anti-labor unions, and no safety net. And so conservative economics. So conservative economics is anti-Social Security, anti any kind of health care, which they've been successful on that. We do not have national health care. Anti-aid for public education. Anti-aid for people who are unemployed. So against things like unemployment insurance, which is a big issue right now. Republicans are trying to cut back on some of the unemployment insurance right now. There's also a movement to try to tap into Social Security, to weaken Social Security right now by conservatives and Republicans right now. So that's trickle-down economics. But do that They'll take that money, the wealthy will get more money, and the idea is they'll produce more. By producing more, they will need more workers. Workers, that means more wages and therefore demand, and that will put more money in the hands of the wealthy. So help the rich produce more, which is help supply, which will create demand. The problem with this is it creates vast inequalities, huge inequalities, which is the goal. We have the most unequal rich and poor in American history. Money is now just flowing like a river. What is it? Jeff Bezos has got $30 billion since the pandemic has began. $30 billion. I can't even wrap my mind around that right now. So trickle-down economics is clearly working the way it's supposed to. Money's funneling to the top from everybody else. It's a big transference from most people to the top. But the other thing it does is it fuels speculation. It fuels like real estate speculation, stock speculation, all that kind of stuff. So that's conservative economics. And trickle-down will get a bad name during the Great Depression. Any other? So it's the exact opposite of Keynesian. We are conservative today. We as in a country. I'm not saying you personally. Younger people are actually a little bit more liberal economically. Older people are more conservative. I'm old, but that doesn't mean I'm conservative or liberal. You can guess. You might guess what I am. Any other questions? Are we good? We covered a lot. Are you sure? Can I do Keynesian? I have that skill set, and for you, I'll do it. Keynesian economics. So this is a definition of liberal economics, and there were elements of liberal economics. I should add, trickle-down economics, you can see all the way to Hamilton, Whig economics, laissez-faire economics, social Darwinism. That's trickle-down economics. Keynesian economics gets the roots a little bit from Jefferson. Jacksonian economics a little bit, but Jackson was more just hated the wealthy and wanted to hang John C. Calhoun. But you'll see this in elements of labor unions and things like that. But Keynesian economics is liberal economics, and it's the exact opposite. What it says is that, especially in times of economic crisis, is that the ultimate goal of government should be to pump money into the hands of the very wealthy, pump money into the hands of the rich. Just one sec. Okay. Sorry, I one of the problems of talking. Let me backtrack because I think I screwed that up. Keynesian economics is to pump money, or the government must do everything in its power to put more money in the hands of working people. To put more money into the hands of working people. So it's the exact opposite of trickle-down economics. Conservative economics is to do everything they can to keep wages for most people down, to keep people's wages low. In fact, keep people desperate. Keep people desperate, they'll accept lower wages. So make people uncomfortable, sad, and miserable. But Keynesian economics or liberal economics are to keep wages high, because if people are secure, they get higher wages. And how do you do this? You pump money in their people's hands to fuel demand. And so what government should be doing is government to keep wages high, to put more money in the hands of workers, would be regulation. So working condition regulations, safety regulations, but the biggest thing about regulations are monopolies. Antitrust legislation is huge because monopolies lower wages. So get rid of monopolies, protect small businesses. Next, progressive income tax. High income taxes at the very top, raise wages for working people. Next, pro-labor unions. Unions raise wages. Next, a safety net, a strong support system just in case there's bad economic times. Strong support system. And what that means is unemployment insurance, Social Security. Keynesian economics would want national health care insurance, Most countries in the world, when they adopted Keynesian economics after World War II, adopted national health insurance. The United States did not. And 27 million people have lost their health insurance the last month and a half. And so that is that shows that the country is not liberal. That's a conservative outcome. Conservatives would want that because that makes workers desperate. They take lower wages. But back to this, national health insurance, aid for education. So help for college, that is part of the safety net. Unemployment insurance, those kind of things. So put money in the hands of working people, what does that do? That increases demand. If they have more money, they buy stuff. If they buy stuff, that encourages production. If they encourage production, that means they hire more workers. Hire more workers, more money in the hands of workers, and that fuels the system. One of the big problems of Keynesian economics would be this, especially in bad economic times, will dramatically increase government spending and also, therefore, increase the debts. The government will have to borrow more. And so it increases deficit spending. It also increases the power of government. It also is a big money transference. You know, rich people don't, the very wealthy, a lot of them don't like this because this means that they lose more economic power. You know, they might not be poor, but money they will not be able to make as much money because money is going to go to working people, meaning the vast majority of people. And but Keynes has a solution for this problem. In good economic times, government doesn't need to spend as much, but also tax revenues go up. And oh, I'm sorry, one more problem with Keynesian economics. Almost forgot. One big problem. This triggers inflation. Demand, people want to buy more, it increases inflation. So in good times, the government can raise taxes or raise interest rates to get rid of inflation. And also by growing the size of the economy, the size of the debt drops. So that's liberal economics. Monroe Doctrine, and that's 1823. The Monroe Doctrine was no European interference in the Western Hemisphere. And that was to keep European powers out of the newly independent countries that used to make up New Spain, basically from Mexico down to Argentina. Any other questions? Wow, we covered a lot again. I'll be glad to answer. I can do one more. None more. Come out, son. I'm looking at my screen. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. I did record this, and I will put this online. If you get it in by noon, so you got a few minutes, but hopefully you got most of them done, I will give you extra credit. And then tomorrow I'm going to come on about 9:20. I'm going to give another sample. I'll talk any last minute things about the test, any last minute questions. I will cover a little bit of the Cold War because I want to keep some sense of normalcy. But if there's no questions, oh, one more thing. So I will go online. I'm going to make myself available anytime tomorrow afternoon and also Friday morning. I'll make myself available. If you have any questions, I'll answer any questions you have. I have to get off about 11 because I'm not supposed to be around. I cannot. It would be unethical for me to be around on Friday, but that's it. All right. On that happy note, I'm signing off. I hope this helped. I will see you tomorrow.